Welcome to Keeping the Lights On. I'm your host, Todd Reed, and on this podcast, I connect with the owners and pros who design, build, and maintain our electrical, communications, and industrial world to explore the best ways forward. Today, I'm joined by Mike Nager, author of All About Smart Manufacturing, a children's book meant to raise awareness of the manufacturing industry and help children see how their interests and talents fit into the manufacturing world of today. In this episode, we are talking about the ongoing skills gap and labor shortage in manufacturing and what we can do about it, whether you're an independent contractor or a part of a large manufacturer. Plus, you'll also discover one very cool restaurant in Freehold, New Jersey that will make you feel right at home. Let's get into the show. Across every industry, there is something that every worker, team, and leader have in common, and they have some favorite restaurant or meal that is their go-to at lunch. And one of my goals for this show is to build a stronger sense of community. So we start each episode by celebrating and exploring those go-to meals with our guests. So Mike, I'd love for you to share, what is your favorite go-to meal for lunch? Is it a home-cooked meal, fast food joint, food truck, or something different?
No, thanks, Todd. When I like to go out to lunch, I like to go to a little place in Freehold, New Jersey. That's the hometown where I'm living. It's called Sweet Lou's Cafe. And Sweet Lou's has been there for years and years. And it's an old school place. They don't take credit cards. You have to go there with cash. And they also don't advertise. So when I moved to the area, it was strictly word of mouth saying, you got to go to Sweet Lou's for lunch or breakfast, because that is the place to go and it's delicious. So if you come to Freehold, that's where we're going to go, Todd. Sweet Lou's Cafe.
Awesome. I'll book my flight as soon as we're done here. So what is it about the place that makes it so special for you?
Well, it's all home cooked. It's fresh. You go there a few different times and people start to know your name. So when you go in, it's not just a impersonal customer experience. It's, hey, Mike, how's it going today? And, all business, they say, is person to person. And that just really typifies it.
Wow, that's awesome. Do you remember how you first heard about it?
Yeah. A neighbor of ours told us about it and said, this is what you have to check out. And it's a very nondescript place from the outside. You just kind of pass by it, wouldn't give it a second thought. But when you go in there, every table is filled. So that is one great indication that it's a local favorite. And every once in a while, people say they'll spot Bruce Springsteen coming in because this is his hometown. And he likes to go there as well. So,
oh, wow. Well, that would be interesting to see him there too.
See the boss.
Oh, yeah. Well, so what's great about that is when I travel, I definitely try to get to places like that because there's a charm about those restaurants that you hear about mainly through word of mouth, like you said. And it's like being let in on a secret. And now you're in once you go there. And it sounds like you definitely are in, especially when they get to know your name. So I love that about your story here. And I think it sets up perfectly to discuss today's topic. So you typically focus on two main ideas in your work, and that's the skills gap and the awareness gap. As you've engaged with those two major gaps, at some point you were inspired to write a children's book all about smart manufacturing. Can you share a bit more about why you started engaging with those gaps and how that led you to specifically write the book for children?
Yeah. So during my day job, I work on the skills gap. So I work with universities, high schools, technical schools, and talk about what are the skill sets needed, especially for manufacturing. And I develop curriculum and equipment that goes into the lab so those students have hands-on experience programming robots, programming industrial controllers and sensors. And when they get out of the program, they'll be very valuable to the employer, much less on-the-job training required after they go through a program like that. So that is one aspect of this workforce development issue that we're experiencing, especially in the United States. The other aspect of it is getting students into those classrooms in the first place. And that's what I call the awareness gap. It's great working on the skills gap, but it's a little bit of preaching to the choir. You're already talking to a school that has a manufacturing engineering program or an industrial maintenance program. You're already talking to the students that have self-selected somehow to get their butts into the seats, into that classroom. But almost everywhere I go around the country, not every seat is filled up. There's empty seats. And it's frankly, depending on where you are, it's a little bit of a struggle getting people to come in and sign up for that manufacturing technician program, industrial maintenance program, or whatever it's being called. So that's what I call the awareness gap. How do we reach out not only to high school students, because in high school, people are pretty much on a certain path that they're going to pursue. They're going to pursue college, they're going to pursue a technical school. But how do you get more people earlier thinking along this line? And that's where the idea for the children's book came up. So I heard several times that we have to capture the imagination of the 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-olds. That is now the age limit, because after that, they've already kind of self-selected themselves towards a certain path. And as you know, in manufacturing, it's very heavily engaged in STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math. And we want those kids to stay in that up to that point so that they don't get self-selected out. So that's what led to the children's book. I thought it would be pretty neat to have a rhyming picture book that parents could read with their kids, talking about manufacturing, robots, conveyors, supply chain, and things like that.
Well, great. So what's really at stake here? And what timeline are we on to fix it? Do you think that the things will kind of naturally fix themselves if you hadn't written this book and contributed something meaningful to the problem?
Yeah. So, I'm trying to do my part to help this workforce issue. I mean, if we look at the workforce, it continues to age every year. The average age of the workforce is increasing. That is not going to happen forever, right? People are starting to retire or are retiring. The baby boomers are getting ready to do so en masse. And we're going to be left with a huge gap of available people. So the time is now to get started. And these 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds, when you reach my age, that time between a 9-year-old and an 18-year-old kind of goes like that. And that's the 18-year-olds that we want to bring into the manufacturing industries. And there's a lot of competition for the same people. So manufacturing wants to hire those 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids, just as Trader Joe's does, just as Walmart wants to, just as the Amazon warehouse wants to. So the manufacturing community itself has to do its job in attracting the workers. So that was kind of the idea of the book. Let's just get people thinking about manufacturing and the education required for it, because it's a hidden industry. There's a lot of very cool things going on behind these walls that people don't have privy to. So it's kind of trying to make a window into that wall so people can peer in. Kind of like those old construction fences that had those little holes in it so that you can look at the bulldozers moving around. I wonder how many kids got into construction because when they were 7 years old, they stood on the milk crate and looked through that hole at the equipment running, right?
Oh, for sure.
So that was kind of the idea. Let's give a vision into the manufacturing enterprise.
My wife and I just saw a little kid looking into a construction site a couple weekends ago. There's this big hole in the ground and cranes, and it just fascinated. I'm like, man, that's exactly what's going to capture that kid's imagination for something for the future for them. Also, you talk about retirements. I'm starting to see, the Gen Xers, my age going now too, like retiring early and then, pursuing another thing, but that means talent lost at that company. So anyway, what children or what type of children do you see this most resonating with?
I see it resonating with almost every kid, to be honest with you. I think once kids are exposed to it and once they see what's involved, there's a natural gravitation towards it. I think kids are natural builders. I think you can give any kid a set of blocks or a set of Legos and they'll go to town with it. So I had 3 kids myself, 1 boy and 2 girls. They all love to play with Legos. They each built something different out of this huge pile of Legos that we had from various kits that got hopelessly mixed up all together. But I think we want to give the opportunity and the awareness to all kids just not those kids that have parents that are working in the industry or have grandparents or a neighbor or a close friend, but even the people, even the children that don't have that personal connection, to be able to peer into it and say, oh, wow, I had no idea there was mobile robots moving around in this factory, and there's someone that has to program it. So I'm very optimistic that, we can solve this labor issue that we're going to face, especially as there's more talk of reshoring manufacturing back to the United States because of various economic and political reasons. And and the manufacturing community has to reach out to the broadest amount of potential workers and bring them in. So I just recently had the All About Smart Manufacturing book translated into Spanish, because as you know, the Spanish community in the U.S. is extremely large, set to be the largest in the country in a few years. And we have to reach out to all of them and say, look, there's going to be a home for you in manufacturing if you like working, with physical things, if you like working with widgets and gadgets and robots and PLCs and things of that nature. And at some point, you have to introduce that to that 8-year-old and 9-year-old.
Right. You've got me thinking about it. So my life has been spent a lot in the construction world and those customers for us. And I go to a lot of their shows, and their national shows, they bring their kids to that show because a lot of those electrical contractors are family businesses, right? Like it's a granddad and grandson, now granddaughter, and all that coming in. And it's the only show. I mentioned it to some other people who go to other shows. Like, there's actually children there, and they support that. Like, they want them to go. And how can that kid but not help but want to be in that business? So this is great, because who's going to see the inside of a factory unless your parents work there or something, or a dear friend. So what kind of impact have you been seeing since the books come out? Have you been partnering with any schools or organizations to get the word out? Yeah.
So a couple of the schools and industry associations contacted me, and they kind of bought some books in bulk to distribute. So it's only been out for 2 months, this particular book.
Oh, okay.
It's been pretty well received. Most of the sales are just like 1Z, 2Z, on Amazon, which is fine. I'd like to get the word out more to big organizations and, the industry societies, get it into their bookstores, if they have a bookstore. But so far, it's been well received. I have another book that I published 2 years ago. This one was geared more for high school students, and in a couple places that's being used as a little quasi textbook on smart manufacturing. Because there's some chapters on technology, then there's some kind of leading questions at the end that make for like good discussion points inside a classroom. So
okay, that's great. I was going to ask, are there so in addition to your 2 books, are there any other resources that you've seen out there that are addressing the awareness gap that you would suggest?
Yes. One very powerful way, to address it, and it's going to require some work from the manufacturing companies themselves, is to participate in Manufacturing Day. So it just passed. It's usually in the beginning of October. And I think October 6th, but I'd have to fact check myself on that one. But it's early in October. Yeah. And the idea is, or the goal is, for every manufacturer to open up its doors to the public. So you had mentioned the trade show where kids were allowed to go in and see construction equipment. The idea is for manufacturers to open up their doors to the community once a year so that parents, teachers, and students can come in and see what's going on behind it, because no one has a clue. They just pass a building. The building might not have any windows in it. It's just a big building by the side of the highway. No one has any idea what's going on in there. So part of it would be, to participate in it, open up your doors and allow people to come in, and that will start to really get people thinking about it. And that will naturally help you engage with the school system that, are in charge of these future employees for your organization. So yeah, that's one thing I would strongly encourage. Manufacturing Day, jump on it. There's a lot of resources from the Manufacturing Institute.
Huh. Yeah, that's great. So back to the show idea, and I think so. This is interesting. We're talking about this. So I don't know. I have not been to some of the manufacturing shows, the conventions and all that. I'm sure you've been to many of them. But the conventions I'm talking about, they specifically have a day and like a couple hours where they bring in local kids they bus them in on school buses, usually high school kids at this point, and they spend 4 or 5 hours walking around the booths. So yeah, I'm at one moment I'm talking to an owner of a construction firm, and then the next moment I'm talking to 16 to 18-year-olds about what they're thinking. And they're generally, because construction is the same way. They don't really know about it, right? They don't know about distribution. They don't know about. So that'd be interesting for the manufacturing associations to maybe look at opening up their shows when they're in a particular city to start, opening the eyes to the students about the opportunities.
Yeah. And I definitely saw that, for a while, in Germany, the Hanover Fair, the last day of the Hanover Fair, they would always open it up for Family Day. So, they would go. But in the US, for a long time, it was, right there. You have to be over 18 to come into this hall. So finally that's starting to change. The IMTS show was just 2 months ago in Chicago. And they did exactly what you said, Todd. They brought kids in on buses. They had the teachers chaperoning them. And then they went around, they saw these huge robots picking up automobiles and moving it around, and I'm sure their eyes just, popped open because this is in the movie. This is real life, right. 15 feet in front of them. So,
okay. So you've touched a little bit on this, but I'm kind of curious, maybe we could spend a little bit more time on how we got to this point and, what factors to this point in manufacturing and what factors have led us to seeing these trends of higher paid jobs with few workers able to do them.
Yeah. So the trend is pretty clear. The word smart manufacturing, sometimes people call it industry 4.0. This is the way forward. And what it does is it eliminates all the lower end jobs that are repetitive, dirty, or dangerous and replaces it with automation so that the people are not being hired to act as a machine, but they're being hired to act as a human controlling the machines. And this is a fundamental shift because it's only been relatively recently that the technology allows you to do that in a very consistent way. Yeah, of course, if you're making 1 million widgets that are all exactly the same, you can automate that process. But it was always harder to automate stuff that had lower throughputs. But the technology is increasing so much that it does. So it's pretty clear that manufacturing is being reshored to the US. There's been huge announcements recently with Intel and other semiconductor plants relocating production back to the US for a variety of reasons. And none of those are going to be hiring people to act as machines. They're going to be highly skilled people using their brains in order to make these processes run. And that's why the skills gap is so important to close quickly.
Right. So when someone hears robots, right, they're thinking, oh, great, I'm losing a job. But what I'm hearing is no, as a matter of fact, it's creating opportunities. Yes, it's replacing a human in some instances, but we also need people in others. So can you maybe explain just a couple examples of how the human and robot or automation or whatever work together?
Yeah, definitely. So you can think of a job in the past that was pretty hard. Let's say it was palletizing bricks or cinder blocks, right? So you have to hire someone to palletize and place all these cinder blocks onto a pallet so they can be shipped out. So when you went to hire people, you were pretty constrained about who you could hire. It had to be someone that was physically strong, that also didn't mind lifting cinder blocks all day long and putting them on pallets and doing it over and over and over again. Fast forward to now, and now we have robot palletizers that are able to do it. In a way, it's opened up the job of doing that palletizing to many people that previously would not be able to do it. So people maybe that aren't particularly physically strong or have particular physical endurance can program a robot easier than picking up those cinder blocks all day long. So even on the back of my book, I even have a person that has a disability, or someone that can't move, too well, but can program a computer just as well or even more so than someone that could. And now that job is now opened up to a person, with some sort of physical disability.
Right.
So in a way, it's enabling a much larger percentage of people to have that particular job than taking away any particular one.
That's a great perspective. So because of this reshoring and other elements that are happening, what kind of timeline? Are we on a tighter timeline to close that awareness gap and significantly increase that pool of, qualified labor?
Yeah, I definitely think we are, because these huge announcements about these plants that are going to be built in Ohio and other places, the electric mobility, that's a whole nother area that is going to see strong growth in the very, very near future. So the time is now. There is no time to waste. There is no more horizon.
Yeah.
When these factories are going to be placed in the communities and they're going to hire 4,000 people, where are these 4,000 people with the skills that they want going to come from?
Right.
It would be great if inside that community, the people could get those positions and those jobs, and they don't have to be hired from outside and coming in, or at least a great portion of them. So now is the time. There is no time to waste, no time to lose. We got to start yesterday.
Okay. So start reading those books.
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, let's explore now. Let's kind of move into the let's explore what's next for the industry. What's next for you and where you see all this heading. So some dreaming to do here now, Mike. So what is your dream for the manufacturing industry? And if these gaps were filled and there was no longer a problem, what do you think the industry would look like?
Well, I think the industry would be much more resilient to impacts that we've seen from the COVID pandemic, where the supply chain got interrupted. I don't think the general public realized how deep the supply chain affects manufacturing operations. So we have a lot of work to do, because we have to rebuild that domestic supply chain to be more resilient to these kind of like natural disasters like the pandemic. But then also, from the political standpoint, there's a lot of political tensions in the world right now. There's a lot of places that, could become hostile to U.S. interests. And we have to make sure that we have it. The Department of Defense is very, very aware of the manufacturing weakness that they saw. And that's how they started the manufacturing institutes about 10 years ago, to start to rebuild up not only the semiconductor, but when you have the semiconductor, you need the high quality silicon that goes into it. And that's a whole process in itself. There's 20 different levels that the general public doesn't really become aware of typically. But all that has to be built up. And if we do that correctly, then we're going to be in a much more secure place from a political and national security standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint. Not going to be as dependent on other parts of the world as we are currently. So I think it's really important for all those reasons.
What else do you think is needed for us to get there? Like, who do we need to get it from? Schools, parents, industry leaders, someone else?
Yeah. So, we were in a great time right now, because everyone seems to have woken up to the importance of manufacturing, and specifically domestic manufacturing. It wasn't always that case. 10 years ago, people were not thinking that the manufacturing industries were as important as they actually turned out to be, and concentrated a little bit more on the top of the supply chain instead of the manufacturing base. So yeah, I think we're in a good spot to move forward, but we got to press ahead, pretty quick.
Okay. You've written this children's book that is aiming to pique the interest of young kids. And you also mentioned the book for high schoolers that are still learning about the world. But what else do you think is needed to nurture that interest so that it grows into a clear, realistic path?
One great thing that again falls onto the manufacturing community. The manufacturing community needs workers and wants workers, so it has to do the work in attracting them. But I would say, for someone that is early in their educational career, let's say high school or right after high school, internships can be set up. And paid internships can go a really long way and helps, both the individual that's trying to learn a trade or to learn a profession to get a true idea of what's involved. So that's really critical. But it also gives the manufacturing entity that hired them a great opportunity to capture that talent right off the bat. So that's something I don't see enough of. People should be creating internships. They should have a constant, group of interns within their company. And then you're going to be well chosen to be able to offer a job to someone just a year or two down the line. And you're going to be in the position to capture that because the job market's very tight right now. I don't see any sign of it getting looser as we move forward. As you said, the baby boomers and the Gen X generation is now phasing out. So that's tens of millions of people phasing out right now.
So if a senior leader in a company were listening to this, what would you want them to know? What benefit does caring about this problem bring them, and how can they help?
Yeah. So for the senior leadership, the workforce problem is your problem, and no one is going to solve it for you. I've talked to a lot of different companies over the years and executives. The perfect candidate that you need tomorrow is not going to knock on your door tomorrow and present themselves with all the skill sets that you need without your active participation in the schooling system, with an internship program, without being on a first name basis, just like Sweet Lou's Cafe, right? You should be on the first name basis with all the educational presidents and principals of your local schools, and not just showing up once a year for an advisory board meeting and saying that, you should do this or do that, but to play an active role. Open up your doors for manufacturing day, create as many paid internships. Don't force people to come and work for free. That's just, it's a pet peeve of mine. You can pay, everyone can afford to pay interns the amount of money that they need to keep things going, and make it welcoming, because you're competing against every other industry and every other employer basically in the world for the same talent. And you've got to make yourself as attractive as possible. It's not a privilege to have someone come through your door and to work for you. It's the opposite. It's a privilege for you to offer them a job. And if you take that mindset, I think it switches gears a whole lot of how to approach this.
I love that mindset, that it's a privilege to have them work for you. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So some of the people that will be listening to this are not going to be manufacturing people. They're going to be an independent contractor, like an electrical contractor or an integrator, panel builder.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So, someone that's not necessarily a CEO of a large manufacturer. So what influence can they have in this discussion, and what could they do?
Yeah. So, you mentioned some trades and professions that are very tightly aligned with the skill sets that manufacturing needs. So, in the contracting and construction business, it's very, very similar. So I would offer almost the same advice, because all of those entities are going to need people moving forward into the future. So there's nothing stopping you from engaging your local school. If you're a contractor, commercial or residential or industrial, let your needs be known to the school, especially if you have summer programs. You can hire some kids to get started doing it. That will also go a long way for it. So the message is pretty much the same.
I think that's why I like an association having some role to do it, because they can bring together, the industrial plant, the distributor, the supplier of those manufacturers items, the tool. Because there's such a wide window. It's not just even on the plant floor. There's such a wide window to do and help this industry, get stronger and to implement.
Yeah. And you don't have to be afraid of it. Sometimes there's a fear, especially with the younger kids, and for them to come to work. I'm not suggesting anything under high school or anything,
right,
lower than 16 years of age, let's say, or 17, where they can be driving at least. We've had several interns at our company from the local high school, or high schools, I should say, because we're in a pretty densely populated area. We have many high schools. And, at first it was like, what's the liability? Is my insurance going to, because we have robots and CNC machines and things ourselves. There's things that potentially could be dangerous. And what we found, and I think it's pretty universal, is that the schools, if the students still are in school and this is part of their education, that all of that is picked up by the school's insurance. So there is no liability to the company itself. So if there's any fears that are making you reluctant to go down this path, I would say just voice them openly and see what the response is. Because we were quite surprised. We got this letter saying, basically we were indemnified from the issues, and it's not an issue. It's covered under this the policy. So,
great.
So don't assume.
Yeah, that's the things that all come up from these when we deal with these issues. So thanks for that. So we like to close, Mike, with centering around the why behind what we do. So I'm curious, why do you do what you do, and what makes you show up day in and day out?
Yeah. So, why do I do it? Well, it's become apparent to me that there's an opportunity here for more young people to discover a career that will give them a better standard of living, a better lifestyle, fulfilling work in the manufacturing industries, particularly. And I'm saying that specifically, but I'm talking about all the technical fields, anything that needs the STEM mindset. And what we need to do is we have to encourage it. We have to broaden the message so that people that just don't fall into it by accident, and people that have family members or friends that are in it are the only ones that would pursue this career. I want to try to eliminate that. So it's working in technical education is pretty rewarding. I worked in business and OEMs and suppliers for a long time. But, when you put in a program, you see your equipment being used, you hear the story of people that were probably on a track to work in the service industry or the fast food industry and have very limited income potentials, going to a 1 year or an 18-month or a 2-year course, and then coming out and being able to earn $40 or $50 or $60,000 in their first year. That's a life changer. The whole trajectory of your life and your family's life has now just changed. So that's pretty darn rewarding when you hear those personal stories, and I hear them a lot, to be honest. So that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, I can imagine that would feel pretty good. So, well, Mike, thanks so much for being here. This has been a fun conversation, and I'm excited to see how your work will continue to impact the next generation.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, Todd. I'm glad to be part of the podcast. Thank you.
Well, that was my conversation with Mike Nager, author of All About Smart Manufacturing, a children's book written to inspire young children with the possibilities and opportunities that await them in the world of manufacturing. You can connect with Mike and get a copy of All About Smart Manufacturing, as well as Mike's other books, by clicking on the links in the show notes. So in our conversation, Mike mentioned the grassroots nature of his efforts. And I think that it's a perfect way to describe what it's going to take to inspire the next generation of manufacturing professionals. Kids look to the adults in their lives for inspiration, affirmation, encouragement, and guidance, which means that each one of us has a powerful opportunity to help these kids see what is really out there for them. So while it's vital for larger manufacturers to help incentivize exposure to manufacturing, when it really comes time for people to actually make a decision, it may be your voice that makes the biggest difference. So if you've enjoyed this episode, you can help us grow this show by leaving a 5-star rating in your favorite podcast player. Thanks for listening to this episode of Keeping the Lights On, and we'll see you next time.